Hi, how are you? Oh my goodness, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I love that. Thank you. I'm gonna take a picture of you. You're holding a sign. That's lovely. Oh, thank you. Thank you. There's another group of kids. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It is my great honor to introduce Mr. Mahara to us. Mr. Mahara is an award-winning civil rights speaker about his experience in the Japanese American imprisonment during the World War II. When he was 9 years old, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. I believe we've started talking about Pearl Harbor in some of your classes. Soon after, Sam and his family were forced from their San Francisco home and moved to a desolate prison camp in Wyoming. They were among 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast imprisoned by the US government. Today, Mr. Mahara tours the country telling the story of what he experienced during 3 years of incarceration. Over 100,000 people have heard his moving presentation, which includes photographs from renowned photographer Dorothea Lange and the Miyahara family collection that vividly illustrate this dark time in the nation's history. His purpose is to deter similar human rights abuses in the future. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mahara.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Can you hear me? All righty. Thank you very much for inviting me. Um, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened during a very difficult time in my life. I was 9 years old, living in San Francisco, and the government decided to remove me and put me in a prison for 3 years. So this is a story about what happened and why it happened. And in the end, I'll answer the question, can it happen again to other people? But the way to start this is a short speech by President George Bush. And the occasion was the opening of the African American Museum in Washington. And President Bush made the following statement. Let's watch this.
Great nation does not hide its history. It faces its flaws and corrects them.
A great nation does not hide history. Wonderful statement. And that's how I begin my story, because I want everyone to know what really happened. We don't hide important things that happened in history. The problem began a long time ago, before I was born, before my parents were born. Way back in the 1800s, there was this type of a political cartoon in the newspapers. And it shows an Asian with a bloody knife in his mouth and a smoking gun, and he's standing over this woman he just killed. And the caption says, "Yellow terror threatens white women." Awful. But it was obviously the artist is trying to create hate and hysteria. And that was very typical in those days. Again, way back before my parents were even born, a long time ago. But let me introduce you to my family. This is the Mihara family. Picture was taken around 1941. That I call him a defiant brat with a folded arms. That's me. I was about 8 years old in this picture. My brother's next to me. My father's here. My mother's standing to the right. And Grandpa and Grandma Mihara are seated. The elder Miharas figured out before they immigrated to get my father a good education. So they sent him to a college in Japan, and he majored in English, of all topics. He majored in English, he graduated in English, really good. And of course, he's good in Japanese. So now with this skill, he found a job in San Francisco working for a newspaper, a bilingual newspaper, and his job was to write English articles. He was very, very good. And in San Francisco, he met my mother, they got married, I was born. And I am an American citizen by birth because I was born in San Francisco. After December 7th, Pearl Harbor attack, awful, awful event. and had a tremendous impact on those of us who are Japanese living in this country, because we started seeing these kinds of cartoons in the media. Here's a stream of Japanese starting from the state of Washington, and they're marching toward Southern California, where they come to a station that's handing out boxes of nitroglycerin, that's TNT, bombs. And the instructions are to go out and destroy defense installations in Southern California. Awful cartoon, clearly aimed at Japanese people who live on the West Coast. So that was another way of the public getting all hysterical about what happened. Notice in fine print, the artist, if you can read it, Dr. Seuss, the children's artist, and he made more of these kinds of hate type cartoons during the war. So it was really a bad thing that happened to us because of these people who wrote these terrible publicity about Japanese. In those days, there was a famous photographer, and she was really good at taking pictures of people. Now, you might recognize, oh, by the way, her name is Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange. She's famous for taking pictures of people like the one on the left, called a migrant mother. And so you can tell by looking at this face of the mother that they're having a real problem during the Great Depression and had trouble getting money to put food on the table. And so she became famous for taking pictures of people. Well, when after December the 7th, the government asked Dorothea to go to San Francisco and start taking pictures of Japanese people in the process of the government removing us. But they told Dorothea, do not take bad pictures. Don't take pictures that are embarrassing, like armed guards forcing us out of our homes. But Dorothea doesn't listen to orders. She takes pictures she thinks will be important, and I'm going to show you some in my talk. The first set of pictures, she came to my grammar school in San Francisco. These are my buddies in my grammar school doing their morning Pledge of Allegiance. The guy wearing a striped t-shirt, he went by the name of Hisashi Kobayashi. Now, the problem we had, our parents gave us these very elaborate Japanese names, and our buddies who aren't Japanese don't know how to pronounce it. And it's kind of embarrassing. So we all created new names, abbreviations or nicknames. And in this case, he called himself Kobe, like the basketball player. So he became known as Kobe Kobayashi. He's been my friend forever. I'll talk about Kobe in a moment. Another group of kids shown here in the second row, these are all my buddies in grammar school. The guy in the middle, he went by the name of Katsutoshi Ito. Katsutoshi, awful, difficult name to pronounce. So his father said that was a mistake. I'm going to rename you Willie. He became known as Willie Ito, and I'll talk more about Willie in a moment. The most famous picture that Dorothea took of these kids are these girls. This girl doing their morning Pledge of Allegiance. And look at their facial expressions. You can tell when they give that pledge, you know, and it says, with liberty and justice for all. They're doing their best to try to show they really mean it when they give the pledge. And that picture became famous. And I'll talk about one of these girls in a moment. But that's a skill that Dorothea Lange had at that time. So she started taking pictures of the very embarrassing scenes. The one on the left is a billboard that went up a half a block from my house, a huge billboard that says bye-bye, and then that abbreviation for Japanese, I call it the four-letter J word. It's really demeaning, but I want you to see it. I'm not going to say it, but I want you to see it so it shows evidence of the kind of hate that the local people had. On the right is the newspaper headline from the San Francisco Examiner. It says, ouster of all, and then that terrible J word is near. In other words, the newspapers are spreading hate and getting the readers to demand the government remove us. Awful, awful conditions because of what the media did at that time. President Roosevelt, he made many good decisions. After all, he was fighting a war against 3 countries, but he made a huge mistake on what to do about Japanese, Germans, and Italians living in this country. He said to the military people, "What shall I do?" And the military said, "Mr. President, you should sign an executive order. And that executive order gives the power to remove people to the military." And he signed it. So that executive order was the document by which now the military has the power to remove. Well, who are the people in the military who has the power? This is a map of the United States military districts in 1942. There were 5 districts. There's one on the East Coast. There was the one in the central, one in the southern, one in the Western Command, and one in the Pacific. So these 5 generals had the power to remove people. It turns out 4 out of the 5 generals, that is the Eastern, the Central, the Southern, and the Pacific, those 4 generals said, "No, I'm not going to remove people because they're important. They're good workers. Why should we remove workers and put them in a prison?" However, this one general on the Western Defense Command, his name is General John DeWitt. General DeWitt hated Japanese. He did not hate Germans, he didn't hate Italians, but he hated Japanese. As a result, he ordered all Japanese from the western states of California, Oregon, and Washington to be removed and put into prison. So this one general had so much hate against only Japanese. That's how we wound up in the prison. Only the people from the western states. Here is evidence of how much hate General DeWitt had. These are kids who had mixed parents. That is, one of the parents was Japanese and the other parent was not. In those days, it was very popular to place kids with mixed parents into orphanages. You know, you've heard the Little Orphan Annie story. Well, very similar. All these kids were, one of the parents was Japanese, the other parent was non-Japanese. General DeWitt found these kids in orphanages and he ordered them into a prison. You're looking at a photograph of all these kids, about 150 kids that General DeWitt ordered out of the orphanages and put into a prison. The prison is called Manzanar Camp in California. So that picture is clear evidence of how much hate that General DeWitt had. So Dorothea kept taking more pictures. Here's the poster that went up in front of our homes. It was signed by General DeWitt. And he gave us 1 week to pack up and get ready for the move. We had to get rid of our homes. We had to get rid of all our possessions, our furnishings, and get ready for the move to go to a prison. 1 week is all he gave us. Here's a typical example, another photo taken by Dorothea Lange. The family's getting ready for the move. The children are wearing dog tags. I remember my tag. It had my name and it had my prisoner number. The government gave me a prisoner number. I haven't committed any crime. Oh, the government decided to give every Japanese to be removed a number, and I had that prisoner number. So here's an example of an embarrassing photo Dorothea took. It shows armed guards doing body searches on people looking for weapons, and when they found no weapons, they put the kids and the families into the buses to go to the prison. Very, very embarrassing. Armed guards came to our town to escort us. The first camps we went to were horse race tracks. This is a typical picture of a horse race track, which was surrounded by barbed wire. And these are temporary camps. Temporary meaning for 3 months we were held. And that's the time it took to build the permanent camps further inland. So the horse race tracks in California were converted into prison. Here's a picture Dorothea took. Families living in horse stalls. Can you smell it? The awful horse stalls that people had to live in during that difficult time. So now, after 3 months, the trains came to pick us up, and now we're on a train for 3 days and 3 nights until we went to Wyoming, the camp in Wyoming. Not everyone agreed to go. Out of 120,000 people, 3 people said, I'm not going to go. They challenged the government. One was named Fred Korematsu. To make a long story short, Fred said, I'm not going to go, and he stayed out. And finally, some people caught him, and he went to trial. He found guilty, and that went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed that he violated General DeWitt's rules, and therefore he shall remain in prison. A very famous case called the Korematsu case. Here's a map of all the camps at that time. Okay, the dots on the left are the California racetracks, and then the triangles in the middle of the country are the permanent camps, the family camps. There's one in Wyoming, one in Idaho, one in Utah, one in Colorado, 2 in Arkansas, 2 in Arizona, and 2 on the eastern slopes of the Sierras in California. So that made up the 10 prison camps. They were huge facilities. Every camp held an average of 10,000 people in a prison camp, 10,000. So where is Heart Mountain? Well, if you've ever been to Yellowstone, you are very close, because if you drive east of Yellowstone about 50 miles, you'll come across a town called Cody, Wyoming. Above Cody, about 30 miles away, there's another town called Powell. And Heart Mountain's the name of the mountain in between Cody and Powell. That's where the government decided to build that prison camp in Wyoming. Before we got there, I was wondering what the people of Cody thought, and I went through the newspaper headlines of those days, and I found this headline in the Cody newspaper, and it said 10,000, and then an awful J word, are to be interned here. Now, that's very misleading, because we're not going to Cody. We were 15 miles away. That's quite a distance. But it doesn't matter. The people of Cody got all shook up because they saw the headline, 10,000 Japanese are coming to Cody. And so the local people got all hysterical, and they demanded to make sure we don't escape. And I'll show you what happened as a result. There's one fellow who remembers what happened. His name is Senator Alan Simpson. And Senator Alan Simpson was a teenager during those days. He remembered what the people of Cody thought when the government brought us there. So let's play this video, which shows what he remembers about that time.
So then we were told there were 11,000 people there. Well, there are only 2 cities larger than that in Wyoming. That was Cheyenne and Casper. Powell was about 2,500. Cody's probably 3,500. And so people thought, now if those people escape, they'll all be killed. There's 11,000 of them there, and they're going to break out, and they'll come to town, and they'll be dead.
So the people of Cody thought, we're going to break out of camp and go to Cody and kill them all. We have no weapons, so we have to strangle everybody in Cody. Awful, but that's the kind of fear and hysteria the local people had at that time. So here's the design of camp at Heart Mountain. 30 blocks. Each block had 24 barracks. Each barrack had 25 people. Huge facility. I call it an American concentration camp. It was big. So the government brought in several thousand carpenters to build the camp, and they worked very hard building these wood barracks. And here's the final picture of the camp. There's Heart Mountain in the background, and these are part of the 450 barracks, and there's a guard tower. There were 9 guard towers surrounding the entire complex. When I got there, I remember getting on the backs of trucks, army trucks, with our hand carry suitcase, and we got on there, and the trucks took us through the main gate to our assigned barrack. When I got there, the government gave me 2 numbers. Everyone got 2 numbers. The first number is my address, 1422C. That's the barrack number. The second number is my prisoner number, 26737D. A file still exists today in Washington on me and on all 120,000 of us. So anyone who's a relative of somebody who was in the camp can get access to the records. So if I gave you permission, you could look at my record. It's in file in Washington. And you're going to see two things. You're going to see my medical records if I went to a hospital. You'll also see my report cards from grammar school. You're not going to see them, they're bad. But anyway, it shows you how much of these records the government kept. So here's the security system. Here's the guard with a 30 caliber rifle on top of the tower. In the middle is a picture of the tower with the lights that lit up the camp at night. And on the right side, there were signs along the fence. And it said, stop for people of Japanese ancestry, because there's a sentry with a weapon, and he's going to shoot if you try to escape. So as a result, no one escaped from Heart Mountain during the 3 years. Not a single person escaped. Here's a design of the barracks. There are 6 rooms in each barrack, and my room was number C, 20 feet by 20 feet. That's for the whole family. So my brother, myself, my 2 parents, 4 of us in one room, 20 feet by 20 feet for 3 years. Very, very difficult condition. Here's what it looked like on the inside. If you put out the 4 beds, there's hardly room for anything else. There was no water, and there was no electricity. So it was really a tough condition at that time. Here's a picture of the family in front of the barrack. That's me in a white shirt, my brother's in a sweater, my mother and her 3 sisters and an uncle. Here's an illustration. I was talking to one of the teachers about artwork. Art became very popular because we had no cameras, and so the artists made a lot of these scenes. Here's a lady, Estelle Ishigo. She made this drawing of kids going to school in a blizzard. And I tell you, I remember it was cold. The first winter was minus 28 degrees, minus 28. And the kids wearing California clothing to go to school. And so it was really a tough time for all of us. The toilets were embarrassing. If you can imagine 10 toilet bowls, no seats, no seat covers. And after meals, it was really strange because there'll be a line of people. If you're lucky, you get to sit on a bowl. And because there's no partitions, there are 9 faces watching you when it came time to do your business. That was embarrassing, but we all have to get used to that. The food at the start looked like this. This kid looking at you has a plate of potatoes. The mother's eating a plate of pickled vegetables. In the picture, there was powdered milk. The Japanese did not eat that kind of food in those days. We love fresh veggies. We like some poultry. We like eggs and fresh milk. As a result, the farmers in the camp worked really hard. After 1 year, grew vegetables, so we're able to eat the kind of food that we preferred. So here's the example. These are the farms that was created by these farmers just outside the camp. The camp is in those dark barracks right there in front of Heart Mountain. The schools look like this. The government only provided rooms. And so the carpenters got busy and they made benches. So that was our desk, and that was our grammar school in these rooms with benches that we used for tables. There was a hospital. All it was 17 barracks with a corridor, and they call it a hospital. And the problem we had was very difficult for our family because my father had a case called glaucoma of his eyes. Those of you who've been to eye specialists, you know glaucoma is very dangerous unless you watch for it and take care of it. But in those days, my father had to see a specialist in San Francisco. And once he went to the camp, no one knew how to take care of his eyes. As a result, my father went blind. He never saw again once he entered the Heart Mountain camp. That was a very difficult time for our family. That wasn't the worst. The worst was grandfather. Grandfather died in camp. We had a funeral in a barrack. And it was a very difficult time. But I wondered what really happened because I watched my grandfather at the hospital and he died. It was a horrible death. He was down to skin and bones. He looked awful. And I looked at his medical records and I found out the doctors thought he might have cancer. So they tried a new experiment on Grandpa. They took away his food and they're trying to starve out the cancer, was the theory. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So my grandfather passed away in camp. Horrible, horrible death. At the very end, I remember the government allowed some of us to go to town to do some shopping, the town of Cody. And I'll never forget, there were signs along the stores that said no, and then that terrible J word. So that's where I learned. I was about 11 years old at that time. I learned what hate really means when I see people putting up hate signs that we're not wanted. A very, very difficult time. At the very end, there was a white attorney in San Francisco named James Purcell. He came to our help. He came to rescue us. What he did was he went to some of the prison camps. He found people living in horse stalls. And he said, I'm going to do something. This is not good. So he filed a lawsuit against the government demanding this one lady, Mitsuha Endo, be removed and released to go back home because it was unconstitutional. Remember, she was denied her liberty and she was denied justice. And on that basis, he asked the Supreme Court to decide to let us go. And the Supreme Court decided it. 9-0, unanimous decision that the government must let us go home because it was unconstitutional. Very, very important decision, and thanks to Mr. James Purcell of that effort. So the trains came to pick us up to go home. The government decided to hide the prison. They sold every barrack. Every barrack was sold for $1 to any returning veteran, provided they remove the barrack, and so there'll be nothing left but farms where there used to be a prison camp. And so now if you went up there to the area, you'll see nothing but farms, where at one time there used to be 450 barracks housing over 10,000 people at Art Mountain. When we got home, the hate was worse than when we left. Our neighbors put up these kinds of signs that says, this is no longer your neighborhood. Don't come back to your home. It was awful. So our parents had a lot of problems getting jobs and getting housing. It was a difficult time. In the end, there was a program called redress. Redress means to make a correction for doing something wrong. And that included three things. We wanted our civil rights restored. We wanted an apology. We wanted the government to say they're sorry. It was a mistake. And we wanted some money because we lost a lot of things in that time. And that effort took 50 years of effort working on Congress, working on the White House to try to get this apology. Along that time, there was an exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. It had on the outside of the exhibit Dorothea Lange's poster girl. And inside, there were pictures of families like this family here. This is the Masuda family. That's Sergeant Kaz Masuda in uniform, U.S. Army uniform. He came to say goodbye to his family, and then he was shipped off to Italy. And he fought for this country, and he died fighting for this country. And that picture was sent to the White House. It got to the attention of no less than President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan said, now's the time. He signed a bill that came from Congress that gave us what we wanted, an apology and some money. That was really helpful. 2 years after that, in 1990, I received a letter from the first President, George H.W. Bush. And President Bush wrote in that letter a sincere apology. And there was a check inside the letter that helped pay for the damages. So that worked out very well. We really appreciate President H.W. Bush. Heart Mountain today, beautiful mountain still there. We built a school at the prison site. It's called a learning center, but it's designed on the outside like barracks, and the inside is a series of schoolrooms where you can do your self-guided tour and learn about what really happened. Here's some typical visitors we have all year round. We have school kids come through from many states and spend their day at Heart Mountain going through the school to learn what really happened. When we built that school, I went to downtown Cody about 10 years ago, and I wonder what the people think of Cody today. And I found these signs that says, "Welcome, Japanese Americans." Well, the people have changed in Cody since the days I used to be there when I was a child. I'm going to close out with some pictures of my buddies. Remember Kobe with a striped t-shirt. Well, he grew up, he went to Berkeley along with several of my friends, and he did very well. He became a pharmacist and very, very successful in the pharmacy field. Willie Ito. Willie was different. He was one of the few who said, "I'm not going to college because I want to be the world's best cartoon artist." So he did well. He went to an art school, learned how to make cartoons. And here's a picture of Willie with a typical model that he created. And Willie was hired by Walt Disney. And he started making these models for Walt Disney. He did very well. But I want you to see a video that was created by Disney. I think you'll recognize this video. How many of you seen Lady in the Tramp? Oh, everybody's seen Lady in the Tramp. Guess who the artist was? Willie. Willie Ito made Lady in the Tramp. He became very famous, and so it doesn't matter if you're really good at your art. You can be also a very successful. I grew up, I went to Berkeley, I went to UCLA grad school, majored in engineering, hired by the Boeing company, became a rocket scientist, and I helped develop rockets. But when I retired from Boeing, and by the way, Boeing treated me very, very well. I really enjoyed working at Boeing. But when I retired, I decided to do something different, which is what I'm doing today. I've been talking to schools all over the country, and I really enjoy educating people about that. Oh, whatever happened to the poster girl? Dorothea Lange's famous poster girl with a large plaid coat. Well, she grew up. She kind of looks like this today. Her eyes and the nose are still the same. And she changed her name twice. Her first name used to be Hideno, Japanese name, and she changed it to Helene, easier to pronounce. Her last name used to be Nakamoto, another typical Japanese name, and she changed it to Mihara. We've been married for almost 70 years, and we have 2 daughters and 2 grandkids, and they're all doing fine, except even the grandkids are all grown up now. They've all gone to college, and they're well on their way. So I wonder, we've been married, our two grandkids graduated from college. One's a rocket scientist, and the other is a landscape architect. So we're doing okay. But I'm going to conclude with a question. Why? Why did this happen? How could it happen? And the answer is, I told you. Remember I told you about the hate. Remember the hysteria from the newspaper headlines and the billboards. And remember some leaders who failed to honor the Constitution. So the question is, can it happen again? Well, I think it can happen. In fact, after 9/11, there was a fellow named Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, tried to get on an airplane with a bomb in his shoe. And they found out he was a Muslim American, so many Muslim Americans, over 1,000 Muslim Americans were put away after 9/11. Today, in a way, it's still going on because there are kids from immigrants who are being put into prison. I know because I've been to some of those prisons in Florida and Texas and California. and the conditions are not good. So I simply say it should never happen again. Look at it this way. Here's a young fellow looking at an armed guard with a worried look on his face. Where's he taking me? This could be a daughter or someone you know in the camp after 3 years, wondering, when do I get out? And this could be your son or a friend's son trying to climb out from the prison over the barbed wire fence, not knowing there's a guard with a weapon looking at him. So I simply say, never again to anyone at all, never again. Well, thank you very much. That ends my talk for this morning. I wrote a book. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll talk to your teacher, Jeff, about getting more books available, maybe through your library. But I wrote a book about what happened, some of the fun times I had, and we'll work on maybe some copies for the library. And also, just to let you know, I give this talk all over the country. That's all I do the rest of the year. And just got back from Texas. I'll be going to New England here in a few weeks. So I really enjoy doing this. So with that, is this a good time for some questions? And I have.
Were they mistreated at that time?
Were we mistreated at the time? Well, if you call being in a prison with barbed wire fence and guards with weapons being mistreated, absolutely. Absolutely mistreated. Now, I have to be honest, though. They didn't come into the camp. We weren't, we weren't tortured in the camp. But just being in the camp with a guard surrounding you, preventing escape, that was bad. And we felt bad about that. Yeah.
What happened to your siblings?
Oh, what happened to my brother? My brother also, he went to a business school, and took over a family business that my parents started. You're familiar with the Japanese folding paper art? You're familiar with that? Well, they developed a store that provides the paper in San Francisco. They became famous, and my brother's now running that store.
Did anyone get caught trying to escape?
At Heart Mountain, no one escaped because we were fearful. But remember, I told you there were 10 camps. At 7 of the camps, there were killings. There were 7 killings at the other camps. It was all due to the guard who was trigger happy. He just shot at random against the people. They weren't even trying to escape, but they simply were shot and killed. 7 cases. There's a book written about those 7. But it clearly was a bad thing that happened. Anyway,
Was there any time when the Japanese revolted against the guards?
any time with Japanese?
Revolted?
Oh, revolted. I wouldn't say revolted. I got to be careful. At Heart Mountain, there was no revolt, but at 2 of the other camps, one is called Tule Lake, Northern California, and one is at Manzanar in Central California. They had revolt. They had real problems. In fact, the Army sent tanks with huge weapons into those camps and made sure everybody behaved. So it really was a bad situation for some of the camps, but it never was that bad at Heart Mountain.
Can you also talk about the draft resistors that were at Heart Mountain?
The which?
Draft resistors at Heart Mountain.
Oh, yes. The government came to Heart Mountain and first asked for volunteers to join the military during the war. And they didn't get enough volunteers. So the draft came to Heart Mountain. Not everyone agreed to be drafted. There was a group of about 60 people, young people who were of draft age, and they decided not to go. They resisted. And they went to trial and they were sent to prison. And so clearly it was bad. And they were in the prison for several years until President Truman signed a pardon for every one of those. And now they were free to go out of the prison. But there was resistance to the draft at that time. Anyway.
Why did certain people get dog tags?
Actually, everyone got a dog tag. There's all the children, because they wanted to make sure we don't get lost in the massive shuffle of 120,000 people into the 10 camps. So that's why they gave us these dog tags, give us our name and our prisoner number. Yeah. Anyway.
What was it like living during that time in the incarceration camp?
Well, it was not easy. Think about it this way. Imagine if your entire family was placed into a single room, 20 feet by 20 feet, the whole family, no walls, no privacy. It was really a tough environment. No electricity, no running water. That was very, very depressing. And think about having to stay there for many years was really, really bad. So it was not easy. It was not a good time. Yeah.
How
Anyway.
was your education?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Education system. The parents really insisted on having good education, even though it's a prison camp. So the government, knowing there aren't enough teachers who were qualified, they hired white teachers from across the country, 35 of them, and they came and lived with us. They had their own barrack, they cooked their own food, and they taught during the day. The bad news was that all of these good teachers went to the high school. And I remember my grammar school, we did not have good teachers, not qualified. I don't remember a thing I was supposed to have learned in grammar school. But no, our grammar schools were not that good. High schools were pretty good because they got the best teachers.
Did you guys harvest your own vegetables?
Did I?
Harvest your own vegetables?
Oh, the answer is yes. We had to harvest. In fact, harvest time, the entire camp, everybody who could work went out to do the harvest because there was so much veggies that being grown. In fact, so much that we had to store them in a cellar, root cellar. It was the biggest football field, a root cellar to hold the veggies until winter. So that was very, very important. We had a lot of veggies during the camp.
Did you have to wear the dog tags every day?
Oh, no, the dog tags are only just to get into the camp, make sure we don't get lost, because there were 10 camps, 120,000 people. They just wanted to make sure we wore those dog tags until we got to the camp. Then they came off. So that was it.
Do you still have your dog tag?
Oh, no, I don't. I don't know what happened to my dog tag. I probably wanted to get rid of it because it looked silly. But no, I remember it, but I didn't keep it. No. Well, thank you all for coming. Is anyone else? Oh, we have one question in the back.
Were the teachers treated better than the prisoners?
Were the teachers treated, you mean the white teachers who were hired in? I don't know if it's better. They got to cook their own food and they had their own quarters that were more comfortable. I guess you'd say that was a little better living than we did. But no, it was, they tried their best. But like I say, the best teachers went to the high school. And I don't remember a thing I learned in grammar school. Our teachers were not very good. Okay, well, that's about it then. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you much.